tell you a story. So this young man grew up, this is a true story, by the way, grew up in Detroit in a rough neighborhood, black neighborhood. And he developed an attitude. He developed a temper. He had to deal with being discriminated against. He grew up in poverty. By the time he was in 5th grade, he was convinced he was stupid and sort of just angry about life already in 5th grade, kind of wanted to give up. But his mom, what she did for a living is she cleaned houses for wealthy people. And she did not want to see her son go the way of everybody else in the neighborhood. And so she noticed that wealthy people read books. And so she made her son go to the library and check out 2 books every single week, read them, and give a report to her. She only had a 3rd grade education, but she was going to make sure her son learned to read. Well, the kids in the neighborhood laughed at him. The gangs came by. They laughed at him. They made fun of him because he didn't participate and hang out for everybody else. But he started enjoying reading those books. And he put up with the shame and the prodding by all the kids in the neighborhood. And he started studying, and his grades came up. And he started studying a lot and decided that that was something that he was good at. And he ended up graduating from Yale and became a famous surgeon. And in 1987, this black surgeon was the first man to separate 2 twins that were conjoined. The backs of their heads were conjoined. And no one thought it could be done, but he did. And he separated these twins. And you know him. His name is Dr. Ben Carson. He ran for president in 2016 for the Republican Party. And they asked him, how were you able to turn out the way you did? And here's what he said. He said, I had a choice. I could emulate and follow after the people in my neighborhood, or I could emulate and choose to follow the faith and discipline of my mother. He made the right choice. And we all have a choice about who we're going to emulate, who we're going to admire, who we're going to follow after. And that's what this Game Changer series is about. It's about who are we going to model our life about? Are we going to model our life after someone that will change our lives positively for the kingdom? And we're going to talk about Enoch today. And so Enoch is in Hebrews, by the way. We started in Hebrews last week, Hebrews chapter 11. And we called it the Hall of Faith. You've probably heard it called that way before. And not only are there a lot of people in Hebrews 11, but the Bible is full of people that we don't want to emulate, but it's full of people that we do want to emulate. But we're going to look at Enoch today. And so in Hebrews 11, verse 5, it says that by faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death. And he was not found because God had taken him. Now, there's very little about Enoch in the Bible, by the way, very little. There's literally 3 passages. We're going to look at all 3 of them today, and twice he's mentioned in a genealogy. But only 2 people that we know for sure never died in the Bible. It was Enoch and Elijah. And so there's something that we can learn about him that we'd like to emulate. And here's the interesting thing. Enoch, he didn't do anything real fantastic, by the way. He didn't lead the Israelites across the Red Sea. We don't know that he did any miracles. He didn't march into Canaan like Joshua did and watch the walls of Jericho tumble and conquer enemies. And yet Enoch somehow was chosen by God not to die. And it says here, by faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death. And he was not found because God had taken him. Now, before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. That's what Enoch did, is he pleased God. And that's what we want to do. That's why we're here, is we want to please God. And one of the ways that we can please God is by learning to emulate people like Enoch. Now, Enoch was not a lot different than the rest of us. Enoch lived in evil times. If you have your Bible, turn to Jude. One of the very few things we know about Enoch. And in Jude verse 14, it says this. It was about these that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied, saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment on all, to convict all the ungodly of all their deeds of ungodliness that they have committed in such an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things that ungodly sinners have spoken against them. I should have counted how many times ungodly is used in those two verses. A lot. But so Enoch lived in evil times. And we live in evil times. So there's some things that we can learn about Enoch, some things we can learn about evil. And not only was there evil in the world, but Jude, who wrote this, by the way, the brother of James, and he quotes the book of Enoch, which is not a biblical book right here, but it was a Jewish book. And so Jude is confirming some of the history that we do know about Enoch here. And so he's confirming that, yes, Enoch did prophesy against evil. But Jude, talking about how Enoch faced evil, in verse 12 says that some of these evil people are hidden reefs in your love feast, as they feast with you without fear, shepherds feeding themselves, waterless clouds swept away by winds, fruitless trees in late autumn, twice dead and uprooted. So Jude, and we're going to read some of this today, talks about evil in times past, and we're going to find out it's the same type of evil that Enoch faced. But he also says you have to be careful, because evil will seep into the life of the church. It will seep into the lives of Christians. None of us are immune from evil. And so what are some of these evil things that we need to guard against? Well, he's going to say first, before we get to way of Cain, let me read this in Jude chapter, well, there's only one chapter in Jude, verse 8. Yet in like manner, these people also relying on their dreams defile the flesh. And then over in verse 18, he says, and the last time there will be scoffers following their own ungodly passions. So here's one of the things that you know about evil. Is evil perverts what God meant for the creation. It perverts the body itself. It takes the body and it uses the body in ways that God didn't create it for. So it's immorality, for one. And then he also goes on and he says here in verse 10, he says, these people blaspheme all that they do not understand, and they're destroyed by all that they, like unreasoning animals, understand instinctively. So here's the other thing about evil. Evil blasphemes Christian beliefs. It blasphemes the Bible. It blasphemes spiritual truth. And why? Because evil chooses truth by instinct, just by the way they feel, by common sense. And they reject the word of God as an authority. And so that's what evil does. So he goes on to describe it further. And in verse 11, he says, woe to them, for they walked in the way of Cain. Now, you remember the way of Cain. And then, by the way, Lamech, who was also the seventh from Adam, so Lamech was contemporary with Enoch. He was just like his great-great-grandfather. And listen to what he says in Genesis chapter 4, 23 through 24 about his attitude towards people.
Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is seven.
So he was a lot like his great-great-grandfather, right? He says, if somebody wounds me or hits me, I'm going to kill them. And if anybody tries to get after me for it, I'm going to punish them 70 times 7 times. I'm going to take care of them. Does evil stirs up anger. Evil causes people to hold grudges. Evil causes people to seek revenge. We live in a culture, by the way, in which the best I can tell, there's a lot of this sort of thing going on. People stay angry all the time. They like to be angry all the time. They listen to things that make them angry all the time. And they hold grudges, and then they seek ways to get even. That's not the way of God. That's the way of Cain. And here's what it says, interestingly, if you back up to verse 9 in Jude, it says, But when the archangel Michael, contending with the devil, was disputing about the body of Moses, he did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment, but said, the Lord rebuke you. Now, this is crazy. So here Michael is contending with the devil about the body of Moses, and it said that not even Michael blasphemed Lucifer, but said, the Lord judge you. Now, why is that? The Bible makes a distinction between the beings God created and their behavior. And God loves those he created, but hates sometimes their behavior. And we are supposed to separate out the two. And we're not supposed to hate people or hold grudges. In fact, anger is really a dangerous thing, because anger is the same sort of sin as murder. And that's what Jesus says. And listen to this in Matthew chapter 5, verse 21 through 22.
You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. And whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire.
Now, those are pretty tough words from Jesus. He says it's not just murder that's wrong, it's anger that you harbor and don't let go of in your soul towards your brother. And that if you hang on to that, it's as if you were a murderer. If you hang on to that, you're still subject to the fire of hell. In other words, you're subject to judgment. So as Christians, we're called not to be in an angry, hateful world, but we're called instead to practice forgiveness and acceptance and understanding. So he says, don't go the way of Cain. Enoch lived at that time. He didn't go the way of Cain. He preached against it. So then he continues in the same verse, and he says, woe to them, for they walked in the way of Cain and abandoned themselves for the sake of gain to Balaam. So do y'all remember the story of Balaam in Numbers 22 through 24? So Balaam was a prophet of God. This is kind of weird to me, because he was a prophet of God that kind of got outside of God's will and got punished for it. But he knew what God spoke to him. And so Balak, the king of Moab, came to Balaam, and he believed that he was a prophet of God, and he said, I need you to curse the Israelites. Balaam said, well, I don't think I can do that, because I don't think God will do it. And he said, well, I'll pay you a lot of money. He said, well, let's try. And so he went and he tried to get a word to condemn and prophesy against the Israelites, but God just wouldn't give it to him. And he said, come on, man, you got to do better than that. I'll pay you a lot more money. And he said, well, I can't say what God doesn't. He said, but I'll tell you what, I'll tell you how to trip them up. If you just entice them to follow idols and entice them with immorality, God will turn his back on them and punish them. And he liked it, and he paid Balaam the money. Now, by the way, Balaam ended up dying later. Joshua says he was killed, so he was punished for his action. But what was Balaam's sin? He wanted money. He wanted gain, and we live in a culture that worships money. You know, you remember the story in Luke 12 where you have the rich man who had a bumper crop. You remember that? A bumper crop. He didn't even know where to put it. He had so much coming in. He said, I know what I'll do. I'm going to give money to the poor. I'm going to support the church. I'm going to do what God wants me to do. That's not what he did. He said, I'm going to build bigger barns, more silos. We're going to store that grain. It's going to be so much grain, I'm never going to have to lift my finger or work again. That's greed. It's more than any one man ever needs. You remember the story? God says, you fool, in this parable that Jesus tells. He says, this very night I'll require your life from you, and then who will spend all this wealth that you've accumulated? And he said, this is what happens to someone who is rich toward himself, but not rich toward God. And so don't be greedy. And then he goes on and says, and like those who perished in Korah's rebellion. Now, I don't know how many of you remember this story. It's in Numbers 16. But following what God told Moses to do, he took Aaron, his brother, who was a Levite, and put him in charge of the priesthood. And only Aaron's group could offer sacrifices and talk to God. Well, Korah, Aaron and Moses' cousin, was angry. He said, well, I'm a Levite. Why can't we offer sacrifices? Why can't we do the same thing? And so he got mad and said, well, we're going to do it anyhow. We're going to go ahead and offer sacrifices. And so he went out and offered sacrifices, and all of his people came with him. They said, we can do it too. And the ground opened up and swallowed them all up. Now, what was that about? It was rebellion against authority. Look back here in verse 8 again in Jude. He said, yet in like manner, these people also relying on their dreams defile the flesh, and they reject authority. Or you can go over here to verse 19. It's these who cause divisions. And here's what it says about people that cause divisions. It says that they're worldly people, devoid of the Spirit. The Spirit of God doesn't lead us to reject authority. So the world rejects the authority of God. And they're devoid of God's Spirit. They reject His morals, His way, His truth. In the church, we have to be careful that we don't reject His authority. The Bible is very clear that we should be subject to those who are leaders among us and respectful of them. And if we don't do that, we get filled with a worldly spirit. God gives us all a place, and we honor that place, the place that God gave me and the place God gave others that are above me. And that's what God calls us to do. And so, back to verse 14, it says, so it was about these that Enoch prophesied. Now, Cain was before the time of Enoch, and these other two stories are after the time of Enoch. But he said it's about these types of sins. Now, let me say something real quick while we're talking about greed. Can I just compliment you guys? What a generous church we have, honestly. Y'all stepped up and provided above and beyond what we needed to redo this auditorium. I'm calling it the worship center because auditorium sounds like something you just watch, but we go in there and we participate. But y'all went above and beyond and continue to go above and beyond every week to support the work of the Lord here. It allows us to hire a youth minister. It allows us to support a work in Brazil, to support Midwestern. It allows us to do so many things. And what a great job. Let's continue to be generous. And let's continue to be submissive to the leadership and encourage them and pray for them as the Bible asks us to do so that the Spirit won't be quenched in our midst. But what did Enoch do in these evil times that set him apart? All right, so Enoch lived in evil times. I can see all the evil. What do? Well, it says Enoch pleased God. How did he do it? Well, the first thing he did, believe it or not, is he spoke up. He prophesied, it says in verse 14. He spoke up against evil. He wasn't quiet. Listen to what Paul says about this in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11.
Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them.
So not only do you refrain from participating in works of darkness, but there's another part to this. As Christians, we're told to expose them. And now I know that makes most of you uncomfortable. Some of you probably not. But most of you, that makes you a little bit uncomfortable. And I've told this story before, but I don't know how many of you remember this, but megaphone preachers, the little people that run around and scream that you're going to hell and you're about to die and stuff. And when I first met Monica, and I was single, and she was at the college at the University of Arizona, she said that her first fear when she met me and heard I was a preacher, I was one of these guys that run around condemning everybody to hell out there on the college campus. So she was very relieved to find out that wasn't my strategy. Now, having said that, I was sharing that story with David Barker one day, and he told me that actually somebody screaming at the street corner that everybody's going to hell if they didn't obey the Bible woke him up. Now, so God uses everybody. He said it caused him to go back and look at his Bible, and it helped him sort of change his ways. So, now, if God calls you to go stand on a street corner and yell, do it. If he doesn't call you to do it, don't. But do what God tells you to do. But I know one thing, we're too often just silent. We don't say anything at all. If people at work don't know you're a Christian, you're too silent. If people at work are talking about inappropriate things or telling inappropriate jokes and you're laughing, then that's the wrong type of thing to say. But if all you are is silent, at least remove yourself from that situation. We need to learn to speak up. And there's something strange about speaking up, by the way. When you talk, it fortifies your convictions. When you speak up for God, I suspect that God's Spirit strengthens your faith. Sometimes we have to talk. In Luke 9:26, Jesus says that if you're ashamed of me and my words, when I come back with all my angels, I'll be ashamed of you. We're called to stand up for Jesus. And our silence speaks volumes sometimes. In Matthew chapter 12, verse 36 through 37, listen to the words of Jesus.
I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned.
Now, I don't know about you, but when I think about being in front of Jesus someday, I got to be honest, the first thing is I'm just purely ashamed because I know I have so many mistakes in my life. And I pray I don't have to hear a recording of everything I said. That would not be a good time. I pray that he says, I see you're washed by the blood. Come on in. And I don't know. I don't know if maybe a part of it is it flashes and I'm even more grateful for the grace because I see what I did. I think that might be the way it is. I don't know that you can just avoid everything you've done in your life. But I know one thing, I want my words to bring glory to Jesus. I want my words to emulate Enoch. I want my words to emulate Jesus. That's what I want in my life. And I also know that I think we talk about he'll judge you by his words. I also think he'll judge you by the words you didn't say. If there's times in our life where we're supposed to speak up and we don't, God's not pleased with that. Now, you need to say it in the right way. In Galatians 6, it says, if it's in the church, let you who are spiritual go and restore someone gently. So we don't do it without love, but we stand against evil. We even care enough about each other to talk to each other. And, we do that. Why? We do that because we know that the purpose is for all of us to be saved. The purpose is for all of us to become more like Jesus. The purpose is for all of us to emulate each other as we emulate Christ, to quote Paul. That's the purpose. In James 5:19 through 20, James, the brother of Jesus, says this about what we ought to do.
My brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth, and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins.
So we need to stand up against sin in the world, but people, we're also supposed to care enough about each other to be truthful with each other. There's not a single person in here that doesn't sometimes need a brother to come alongside them and say, brother, I love you. Is everything okay? Are you going the right direction? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? We're called to love each other that much. And why? Because the purpose of our life is not just this life, it's the next life. I mean, the purpose is salvation. And sometimes that means we have to open up with each other and be honest with each other. In 2013, true story, Decatur, Georgia, in a learning preparatory academy, the secretary named Antoinette Tuff was there early in the morning before anybody else. The kids were starting to come in, and in walked Michael Brandon Hill with an AK-47 and 500 rounds of ammunition, intending on killing as many people as he could, and he walked into Antoinette. Antoinette quickly got 911 on the line as he came in, and it recorded the whole thing. It's an amazing conversation. And Antoinette begged him to reconsider what he was about to do. And Antoinette told him that she had struggled with depression, that she had tried to commit suicide, that she had struggled with so many things in her life, and that there was hope on the other side. And she told him that she loved him and that God loved him, and pleaded with him to reconsider. And amazingly, Antoinette talked him in to putting down his weapons and laying down. And the police officers came in and subdued him. And hundreds of people, at least scores of people, were saved that day because of Antoinette's courage. You know, I don't know how many people would have the courage to do that. I'm not asking you, and Jesus isn't asking you, to go find people that are armed with 500 rounds of ammunition and talk them down, but he's asking you to care enough about your brother that you see walking off the edge of the cliff to at least talk to him about it. Show him you care. Be honest with him. Share your struggles. Sometimes we don't help each other because people see us all like we're in some sort of little righteous bubble without any problems. No wonder no one wants to talk to us. We all have problems. Let's share them with each other. James says, confess them one to another so that we can save each other. And that's what Enoch did, is he spoke up because he cared about people. Now, I don't know how much good he did. Maybe he did some good. It was several hundred years more before God says in Genesis 6 that every intent of the heart of man is evil and the flood came. But maybe he bought him time. I don't know. But it's what God calls us to do. So that's the one thing, is Enoch spoke up. There's one other thing, and that is that Enoch walked with God. Back in Genesis chapter 5, it says that in verse 22, Enoch walked with God. And then it goes on and says in verse 23, thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Now, I want you to imagine this. You know, I hope he was single, by the way. I think he had a wife. She's got to be wondering, what did he do? He went for a walk with God. He never came home. I was at the graduation party for Erica Moore, and I ran into Chuck and Ella Myers, and I talked to him for a long time. And I thought, you know, I'd better get back to my wife because she's going to think I died or something. They said, oh, she knows you're a preacher. Don't worry about it. And I said, well, that's the truth. And, you know, but at least I came back. This guy never came back. Now, what sort of relationship do you have with God that he loves you so much he just takes you home with him? And in Hebrews, talking about faith, right, and talking about Enoch, right after talking about Enoch in verse 6, it says this. And without faith, it's impossible to please him, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists, and then he rewards those who seek him. So faith is believing in God so much that you have a relationship with him. You talk to him. You're with him. In Psalm chapter 46, verse 10, do you have that one? Psalm 46, verse 10. Listen to what David says. I'll quote it. I don't even know if he has it. So,
I got it.
Okay, you got it? All right. He was just that much into the sermon. I like that.
He says, "Stop your striving and recognize that I am God. I will be exalted over the nations. I will be exalted over the earth."
Okay. And I may have put the wrong one in there, but the one I'm thinking about is this. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Now, think about that. When, I like to sometimes be alone with my wife so we can just talk. It's hard to do when you have little kids, isn't it? Good luck with that. One of the marriage counselors told us you have to have couch time, and you tell your kids this is our couch time, and they're not allowed to interfere. Because if you don't have conversation with your wife that is intentional and quality, you don't have a good relationship with your wife or your husband. But the same thing goes with God. And I've found myself some recently, I don't know why, just talking to God. And I'm telling him everything. I'm telling him the good things, the bad things, what I'm afraid of. And it's helping me because the more I talk to him, the more I realize that he's in charge, I'm not. And the more I realize how much he's already blessed me and how I can continue to trust him and how much I love him and how much he loves me. And so one of the things we have to have is a relationship with God. And so not only we talk to him, but we also got to be in his word. One reason a lot of people are so instinctive in the way they determine truth is they don't know the truth. In Psalm 19, it's one of the best possible places to go to tell you about being in the Word. And Psalms in general, what a great place to go if you just want to have a relationship with God and see how David and others who wrote these Psalms, the type of relationship they had with God, the way they talked to him, and it will teach you about how you can connect with God. But this is about his word. And it says in verse 1 of Psalm 119, "Blessed are those whose way is blameless, who walk in the law of the Lord." There's a blessing to walking in the law of the Lord, but you have to know it. And then in verse 8 it says, "I will keep your statutes. Do not utterly forsake me." Verse 9, "How can a young man keep his way pure? By guarding it according to your word." And so this word will protect your life from sin. And this is strange, but even someone that is in their 60s and 70s and 80s, and I promise you this, Satan can trick any of us, but if you'll keep your mind and heart in the word, the Spirit will protect you. And in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13, he says that there is no temptation that will come upon you that's not common to men. We're all going to get these. But the Lord is faithful. He will not tempt you with something that is harder than you can withstand. And with every temptation, he provides a way out. And if you're in the Word, you're more likely to find the way out. And then he says here in verse 15, "I will meditate on your precepts and fix my eyes on your ways, and I will delight in your statutes. I will not forget your word." So we want to walk with God like Enoch did. We want to stand up against sin like Enoch did. We want to try and bring people to God like Enoch did. But Amos 3:3 says this about being with God. Listen to this.
"Do two walk together unless they have agreed to meet?"
Do two walk together unless they have agreed to meet? The answer is no. I've learned this. If I want to talk and my wife isn't ready, there's no talking. It doesn't matter how much I want to talk. It has to wait until she's ready. And I'm sure it goes the other way. If she wants to talk and I'm not ready, there's no talking. The two have to agree. And here's what I found, is God's always ready. The problem's usually me. God is always there. We're the ones that need to agree that we're going to walk with God. Finish with this story. My sister-in-law was here for a week, and we have these Nespresso pods. And, you know, it's great coffee. It's a little bit expensive, and I'm a cheapskate. I admit it. And I thought, great, my sister-in-law's coming. She'll probably go through 8 of those a day. That's going to be $8 a day just for her coffee fix. And so I counted up all the coffees, and there weren't enough pods for her, much less her and us. So I ordered some. They didn't get there quite in time, and so I got home one day after work, and she said, Kevin, we ran out of coffee in the coffee thing. I thought, yeah, we ran out. And she said, but don't worry about it. I found a bag full of those coffee pods in the closet, and I just used them. Well, y'all, those were empty ones that I was recycling. I so wish I had just filled those into the little pot there. I could have saved a lot of money. But the new box came the next day, and I said, well, those are used ones. And she said, well, no wonder my coffee was weak. So, you know, let me tell you, some of us are just recycling things that don't work in our life. We're recycling thoughts that are empty. We're recycling fleshly desires that have no meaning, that are empty. And instead of walking with God, we're recycling empty pods. Let's walk with God. Let's trust God. Life is a storm. Walk through it with God. Let him fill your life like Enoch did. Let's stand and sing.